It's the Growing for Market podcast.
So some of it, it's like the law is there. We're just not getting enforcement, like the grain fraud too. And some of it is just the USDA has made the wrong call on issues like hydroponic. But it's affecting every sector of our industry right now. And the crazy thing is that where they've had really good enforcement in Europe, their organic is growing so much faster than it is here. And I think that's testament to show that like people actually want strong standards. When you go purchase organic, you want it to have a lot of meaning. And so it's only, I think it's 6% of all the food sold in the US, but it's only 1% of the land is certified as organic because it's really not working for the farmers. So much is being imported. And I think, the whole reason why we created the standard is for that higher price point and economic viability of our operations. And it's just not working for us right now. It's going to take a while for the Real Organic Project seal to have marketplace value, but I believe it will over time because it'll come to be known and trusted.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine for 34 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. A well-built high tunnel is one of the smartest investments a small farm can make. It protects your crops, extends your season, and keeps income rolling in even through winter. Nifty Hoops builds complete Gothic high tunnels that are easy to install and built to last. Their easy, bolt-together construction makes setup straightforward and efficient, whether it's a small backyard hoop house or a dozen large production-scale high tunnels. Especially through their community build option, where professional builders work alongside your crew, family, or neighbors to build each structure, usually in a single day. Most growers go with Nifty's full setup: steel-framed end walls, roll-up sides, baseboards, double plastic with inflation, automated vents, and real doors, all priced to make the best choice the easy one. Nifty is a small crew out of Michigan using U.S. steel and working hands-on with growers across the country. They'll help evaluate your site, handle NRCS paperwork, and if they're building with you, they'll even float your cost share until after the build. Visit niftyhoops.com to learn more. Farm more seasons. Grow more food. Nifty Hoops. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Linley Dixon to the Growing for Market podcast. Linley is the co-director of the Real Organic Project, and she farms at Adobe House Farm in Durango, Colorado. Linley also has a master's degree in soil science, a PhD in plant pathology, and did a 2-year postdoctorate with the USDA's Systematic Botany and Mycology Laboratory in plant fungal interactions. That sounds super interesting. I want to make sure and talk about that. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Linley.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I listen to the podcast all the time, so it's fun to be on it.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Well, in keeping with that, first of all, can you just tell us a little bit about your farm?
Sure. Yeah. We started farming back in 2010. And by we, I mean my husband and I. And then my brother, who lived in Portland and he was studying sustainability, started to realize that the food system was kind of the answer to all of the sustainability questions he was having. So he moved out here and joined us. And he's been the key to kind of making it all work. And we were on rented land for 8 years. And we finally decided, we were just like, we got to quit. You have to put in so much infrastructure, and the landowners, we were on like 5 different plots over the course of the 8 years. So, sometimes at the most we were farming 3 plots at the same time. So it was just a little crazy. And we were just like, I don't think we can keep this up. We want to put in a lot of infrastructure, and the farms keep going up for sale on us. So we threw in the towel after having a really awesome on-farm CSA pickup that was 150 members. And we were just like tired, and it just didn't see it working for the long haul. And incredibly, we got a knock on the door, and there was, through the grapevine, people heard that we were quitting. And there was a family that wanted to keep farmers on their land. And they were like, do you want to rent ours? And I was like, no, because I don't want to rent land anymore. I was kind of fed up with landowners at that point, not understanding what we were going through. And we actually worked out a deal where we moved on to their piece of property. We, over the course of 2 years, applied for an FSA loan. They lowered the price a little bit for us to be able to afford it. And now we own our farm, and we've been cranking for 15 years now. And it just feels like we've like done a repeat for the last 5 years. Like, it's just like, okay, same farm plan, same marketing plan. It feels like it's working. And we kind of have balance in our lives, which I know everybody kind of has a farm origin story that's a little chaotic. And the farms that make it seem to be the ones that can secure long-term land access and figure out that whole work-life balance thing. And I think we're there.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, it is hard to farm on rented land, especially with the uncertainty. I mean, we started our farm in Pennsylvania and thought we were going to be there forever, and now we're in central Maine, right? So
Right. Yes.
I mean, as you know, people don't, farming, you can't really like flip a farm. I mean, probably some people have tried, but not the way you can like fix up a house and sell it for twice. I feel like some of the investments that we make as farmers are for the long haul. It's really hard to put the care and the money and everything into making improvements when you're unsure whether you're going to get the benefits of those down the road. So I'm so glad to hear that you guys have found a forever home.
Yeah, especially in places like Maine, and we're high elevation in Southwest Colorado. And so our season is really short. That's frost free. I mean, we get like 90 days, and that's it if we're lucky. So we have to do season extension in greenhouse growing in order to make it all work. And that's where it was just like, oh gosh, we really need land access, because that is expensive infrastructure. We put in $100,000 year-round greenhouse with pipe rail for tomato production. And there's no way we were going to do that on rented land,
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting because, our season is getting longer all the time. But we're probably not much more than 90 days. It's a little more than that, but we have got about 90 days frost free up here in Maine. So tell me about, what do you grow?
Mixed vegetables. We go to farmers market. We did have a CSA, but we started to really hone in on what we were good at. So there's about 10 things that we do in higher volume, and we're able to get those into restaurants. Our cherry tomatoes make it into the local grocery store shelves, which is kind of a big feat. I mean, I was just yesterday, even with all the inflation, looking at an organic 350 cherry tomato pint. I was just like, oh my gosh, how can we compete with that? So it's pretty awesome when we can find some shelf space, but mostly that's due to our community knowing who we are and demanding that it happen. But it's only possible with the independently owned grocery stores now. It's even not working with our local natural grocers, which has like 300, like a chain of 300. We can't make it work for the price point that they want for a cherry tomato, even though they could mark it up a lot and, make more money off of it. And the customers would buy it because they know us and they love the taste of our cherry tomatoes. But it's still so consolidated now that we can only work there's a local food co-op and an independent grocery store, and then a farm that has a really large farm stand. It's called James Ranch. They have like a burger joint on their farm. So it's pretty awesome. We sell a lot of produce through them as well, farmers market and then restaurants. But our 10 crops are kind of the most profitable crops for us. Our tomatoes, basil, cucumbers, peppers, greens, and then winter squash, kale, chard, parsley. That's about it. I'm sure I'm missing a few others that we pepper in, onions, garlic. But I know the list, you were like, but then we do a little bit of all these other things, right? So then you're kind of the crazy, I love to grow things farmer, and everything else just makes its way. But I would say those things that I listed, especially the salad greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, and basil. Those are the big five. And ironically, it's not really actually a coincidence. Those are all the hydroponic crops. I know you talked with Dave before me, and the most profitable crops on our farm are the ones that they've been able to grow hydroponically. So those profitable crops allow us to grow all the cabbages and the things that don't make as much money, right? And it's just hard to see that price point be so low when you're trying to get those items on the grocery store shelves, because you're competing with mostly places that pay $1 an hour and are being imported. And so, yeah, it's such a challenge to keep your farm profitable when those really profitable crops are so cheap in the grocery store shelves as organic.
Yeah, it's tough. And I mean, that tracks, right? Because those crops that you mentioned that are your most profitable, I mean, it seems like like I noticed just touring around North America, those are the ones that account for the majority of the greenhouse production, right? Because it's the things that need to be fresh. So, right. So people need a continuous supply of and have a high enough price point that they can be profitable. And so that makes sense.
In a greenhouse space. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask about your greenhouse because I know you said that it has pipe rail, which I think is like pretty unusual for. I haven't seen a lot of farms having pipe rail. Can you,
Yeah.
for people who don't know what that is, can you tell us? I mean, I know what that is, but tell us what pipe rail is.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't do it. It's very expensive to put in. And I almost didn't think I had earned the right yet to put in heat into my greenhouse or any infrastructure until I got to be a much better grower. And so, but pipe rail was a big leap because we had to pay for welding of the pipes. But actually, it ended up being really worthwhile because our heat, so we have a solar panel array and the hot water runs through the pipes. And it's just a much more even way to grow the tomatoes when that heat comes kind of rising up out of the pipes. But even if you don't run your hot water system through the pipes, you should still do it. You still make your money back because we put carts. So our harvest carts and our, how you lower and lean every week, that happens at 12 feet high. And instead of climbing up and down a ladder, it's crazy that people do this. Like we did that at the beginning. And then it's so much faster to run a cart along your pipe rail. And then you just stay up there and you can do all your plant work off of the pipes. So once you become a good enough grower that you feel like you can afford that infrastructure, pipe rail's the way to go. And I didn't really believe it until, I got to tour all these pilot farms with being part of the Real Organic Project. And Davey Miskell was somebody that I visited all the Vermont farms at the beginning. And every tomato greenhouse we went into, and he would talk to the growers, he's so generous with his knowledge. And he'd be like, "Are you doing pipe rail? You really should do pipe rail." And after I heard it like the fourth or fifth time, I was like, gosh, I think I really should do pipe rail. It's funny how as growers, we have such a hard time like hearing things and then taking the leap to actually do it. And it was hearing Davey say it over and over again that this is the secret that finally convinced me, man, I think I should take the leap. And it was a big investment. That was a huge investment. So I don't want to be like not realistic about that, but it will pay back in time that you save and just ease and your back, right? You're able to like be on a cart and not carry the tomatoes around. You just stack them on your cart and you're rolling it along the pipe rail. So it just makes everything happen so much easier. And when you get really good at tomato production, you're going to want that efficiency that the pipe rail allows.
Yeah, pipe rail is great. And that's why I wanted to make sure and talk about it a little bit, because that's what most of the big greenhouses that I've been in have. And tell me how big your greenhouse is again.
We just have a 100 by 34 in order to be able to harvest the tomatoes kind of right at eye level. You want to we put in 12-foot ground posts, and then we added a 2-foot addition so that we could just bring that height of the trellising system up a bit. And so then we're never harvesting on the ground. Imagine that, when your first fruit set, even your first 3 in our lower greenhouses, you're like crawling on the ground to get those tomatoes, right? And so that's the beautiful thing if you can get it up high.
The model that we bought had basically you could pay a little more and get longer ground posts. And we did the same thing to get our purlins high enough that we could grow. It gives you more growing space. It's well worth it. I don't think it was that much more expensive for us to do the taller greenhouse. And yeah, if you're doing the vining crops like tomatoes or cucumbers or even peppers and eggplants, stuff like that, you'll appreciate that extra space.
The other thing we did is put in like a 10-foot concrete slab at the end where the cart goes, just so you can roll that cart around. And then the opposite end has your pad and fan cooling system. And then you hook it up to a computer so that it just runs automatically now. So these are all the expenses when I said, talked about that $100,000 greenhouse that we put in. Those are the big expenses, but well worth it. We made our money back the first year. We grossed $100,000 out of that thing.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And that should be encouraging for people. It pays off. Yeah, it's one of those things. I get it. It's like whether you're starting a farm or considering more investments, all those little things add up, but they also make things easier and make things grow better. Because if people aren't familiar, the pipe rail system it's like iron pipes that go down what otherwise would be the walking pathways in the greenhouse, right? And so it circulates. I haven't seen a greenhouse that I like yours. I would call a single bay, right? Like a 34-foot wide. Like I've mostly seen pipe rail systems in multi-bay greenhouses. So that's really interesting and cool to me that you put a pipe rail system in a single bay greenhouse. And also it should show people that, it can be done. And so, but basically it's, if people haven't seen it, tell me if I have any of this wrong, Linley, but you have, a set of 2 pipes that go down every walking pathway, right? So instead
Correct.
of just an open pathway, you've got those pipes going down, and that you have a heater. I know you said yours is connected to solar, but basically it circulates hot water in those pipes, right? So instead of forced air or something like that, basically hot water circulates in those pipes. So you get such a nice growing effect because the pipes get hot and the heat, of course, rises up through the canopy. And so makes the whole tomato plant warm and keeps them dry, and you have less disease. And it's both such a nice growing environment. And like you said, you can run your carts and carts down the bottom for harvesting, scissor lifts, or some kind of platforms up at the top. I'm very envious. I have a greenhouse project that I'm working on trying to get it funded right now, actually. And pipe rail is definitely in the forecast for that one if I can get it funded.
We got a slow money loan. So I don't know if you have slow money there, but our community pitched in and we were able to pay back the next year. So that really helped us.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you said that. It reminded me. Yeah, we do have a slow money chapter up here in Maine. So yeah, maybe I should.
And I should clarify too, I'm not like this angel that has everything hooked up to our solar panels. So the solar panels offset the electric use in the greenhouse, and the hot water is heated by natural gas. So, of course, there are like more expensive upgrades that I know Dave has looked into in terms of you can hook up to electric an air source heat pump, which will actually kind of take the cold air from outside and heat the air. We have not gotten there, but I think that's a way to get this entire system electrical, but we are not there yet. So just want to be transparent about that.
Okay, that's good for me to know because, the project, I'm trying to incorporate as much energy efficiency as possible into the project. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And so it sounds like I should probably look into that also.
We got a REAP grant for those panels, solar panels. And I've heard that those grants are not being honored right now. So keep an eye on that. But that was a really great way to get affordable solar panels up and running too.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the grants have done a lot of good are frozen right now, but hopefully that will not be forever. So, one last question about your pipe rail. So, did you have to put in concrete at the front and back of your greenhouse to give No, so I wasn't sure if you needed concrete to support the pipe rail at the ends.
No. So yeah, there's those little stands that the pipe rail can sit on top of. You definitely don't want to be heating your soil. You want to just heat, on the stands. The pipe rail wants to run in the air, not on the soil. I think that's a mistake that some people put like heat underneath their soil and stuff. Tomatoes won't like that. So the concrete slab is on the entrance where the door is. And so you only need 10 feet there. And our tomatoes pretty much run, I'd say there's maybe 4 or 5 feet at the other end, but really up against, the cooling pad fan system that we have on the other end. So no concrete is needed at the other side. So you just reverse your cart back. You go to the end and then you do the other side on your way back. One side at a time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Got it. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
This is Nathan from Tilth Soil. The other day, I told a friend that I think any product advertised on a podcast is probably a scam. And now I get to eat my words because I really do think it's worth talking to serious growers about living soil. But instead of listening to me bloviate about root development or trace minerals, you're probably better off just trying it out. Go to tilthsoil.com/GFM to request a sample of our seed starting mix and see what your plants think. If you're not impressed, then forget we exist. But if you like what you see, then reach out and we can get into the details. Whether you need a yard, a truckload, or want help organizing a group buy, call or text Josh at 216-870-0642. And yes, I am reading his personal cell phone number in a podcast ad. All right, play the jingle.
I'm in my garden, the sun is shining, my plants are thriving in tilth soil.
We know it's peak season. You're busy. But the messages you send now are what drive renewals later. That's why Farmhand is offering free, instant access to their farmer-built newsletter builder. No demos, no setup fees, just drop your logo, upload your list, and start sending farm-branded emails that boost sales, engage members, and save you hours each week. Get free access today at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. And now, back to the show. Okay, well, thank you for humoring my questions about your pipe rail system, but I've just seen that in so few greenhouses that are smaller than really big that I wanted people to take that into account. Like when they're thinking about how to heat their greenhouses, it is really great, as you can attest to. So.
Well, I didn't learn any of this on my own. I mean, Elliot Coleman called Dave Chapman the best tomato grower in the, potentially in the world, organic tomato grower, but at least in the States. And I just asked, please help me figure out how to do this. So this is all Dave's long, hard fought, experience that then got passed down onto me. So very grateful for that.
Great. Well, yeah, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants when it comes to all this stuff. I mean, millennia of agricultural knowledge. So it's good that it sounds like you had a really good teacher. Thanks, Dave. But I mean, that's part of the reason we're doing the podcast and the magazine, right? Is because farming can be so isolated. Sometimes we can just spend feels like we can just spend weeks out on our own farms, and many people probably do. But I think farmers are so innovative. That's the whole point of this, is that we're trying to get people to share so we can learn from each other. So speaking of learning from each other, I gotta ask, so can you tell us more about what you studied for your master's, PhD, and postdoc? I don't know if that sounds so relevant to so much of what we're doing just with the soil science and things like that. I don't know if that's too, can you?
I can do it quickly. Yeah, I could probably do a podcast episode for each degree. That's right.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that. Well, actually, I was thinking it might be interesting to do a podcast episode on soil health, talk to you about that sometime, probably beyond the scope of what we're doing today. But yeah, if you could just briefly summarize your years and years of work in those fields, that would be great.
Yeah, basically when I graduated from college, I went to there were only 4 universities at the time that had organic research programs. I graduated in the year 2000, which was right when the USDA passed their organic regulations. So finally, there was some money to invest in organic research. And one of the universities was in Morgantown, West Virginia University. And I was working on their organic research farm to study how diversity impacts diseases. And so I was a plant pathologist, which I didn't really know what that was when I first got started, but it fit my personality really well because you basically have to study every kingdom of life because you have pathogens that are nematodes, fungi, bacteria, viruses, all infecting plants, which are the other kingdom that I love. So it just gave me this beautiful kind of overshot with all my coursework of how everything interacts. And one of the coolest things that I learned through that was just, we tend to think of things as a pathogen or beneficial. And what you learn when you start investigating these microbes is that they'll hang out and they'll be endophytic, we call it, or they'll be a saprophyte, so they only feed on dead material. And then it's like when the host gets weak in some way, if they're strained, either the environment is too wet or there's too much nitrogen in the soil. There's all kinds of conditions that make it so that a disease can then take off. And then these pathogens have a chance to just kind of go crazy. You know how when you get really underslept, you tend to get sick? It's kind of like that. It's like, of course, you still have to get the virus in order to be sick. And none of us are immune from getting sick, but it really helps to be healthy for a plant. And so there's something called the disease triangle, and this is true for humans too. But you have to have the presence of a pathogen and pretty much know that they're always there, right? They're always waiting, but you have to have the right environmental conditions. And you have to have a susceptible host. And in that host susceptibility, it's not only genetics. It's not just, do you have a gene that makes it so that you're susceptible? It is also, I mean, that's a huge part of it, but it also has to do with like, are you giving, too much nitrogen to the plant? And so now like the aphids are going to go crazy, right? And then they're creating conditions so that a plant pathogen can then come in. And so there's so much interaction that it's like, it's almost too complex to ever fully understand, but you start to like understand that there's this whole web of life, and it's really fascinating to start, pulling at whatever happens to be going on. So I studied specifically tomatoes, and I was looking at the spread of root knot nematode. Meloidogyne incognita is the northern root knot nematode. And in West Virginia, it might not be the case now, but we could inoculate the soils with that and it wouldn't survive. So it was the southern root knot nematode, Meloidogyne incognita. And because it was so far north, the winters would kill it off. So we were looking at the spread of this root knot nematode through the soil when there were resistant varieties interplanted. And so it's just kind of a controlled way to see, hey, if you have a little bit more diversity in the field, can you get less disease? It's kind of an obvious thing, but we were just collecting basic data on that. And then the answer was yes. And we also looked at the spread of fungal disease through tomatoes with different host diversity situations. But then for my PhD, I studied it was a tropical pathogen. It's called Cornespora cassicola, target spot of tomato. And it's a really common pest actually on cucumbers in greenhouses. And there's target spot in greenhouses too, just because it's a tropical disease, right? You can get it in our controlled environment greenhouses. And I've seen that it's really taken off. But it has a really wide host range. And we were looking at weeds and other things that it could be hopping from. But interestingly, I found that a lot of the fungi they were subspecies. So even though Cornespora cassicola was on the weeds, it wasn't hopping to the crop plant very much because they were sort of specific. Each variety was specific to either papaya or tomato or cucumber. So there wasn't a lot of like cross jumping going on, which means that like you really can have, it's always so much more complex than you think it is, right? So you go find this weed and it's, oh my gosh, it's got the disease, it's a host for this disease, but it's really important to do. I was doing molecular work in addition to, you spray it's just plant pathogenicity studies where you actually spray the fungus onto the tomato and see if it's susceptible. So by combining that kind of molecular work of how closely they're all related with the pathogenicity studies, you could see that actually, you don't have to go out there and herbicide your whole farm because they're carriers of this fungus, right? That actually there's more host specificity than we realized.
And do you still use that kind of stuff in your day-to-day on the farm?
It's so funny. I actually have used it a lot more than I realized. First of all, just the whole concept of like greater diversity equals health was like all of my research kind of built up to proving that over and over again. But beyond that, I had herbicide carryover on my tomatoes like the first year I started. And I think a lot of people know about this. It's like a newer chemistry. All of the weeds out here are resistant to 2,4-D now. So they started introducing these new aminopyralids, they were called. It's the class of herbicides that was going to get the thistle that everybody is like so afraid of thistle, right? So they're spraying these new chemistries. They go on all of the fields. And if you get any kind of manure for your compost, it tends to just go right through the gut. The cow eats the pasture, goes right through the gut of the cow. We even composted the manure. They still didn't go away. And these things act kind of like hormones. They're auxins. So in parts per billion, you'll see this kind of crippling where the leaves curl up. And we were seeing these on our tomatoes. And our local extension service was calling it curly top virus. And I was like, no, it's not. I have this plant pathology background. And so it actually helped kind of solve a region-wide problem where we were seeing this curl happening in all the gardens and the farms around the area. And it turned out that the fairgrounds was giving out compost that had manure in it that was contaminated with aminopyralids. And we actually brought in the Dow representative to talk about this problem. Like, we can't even garden with manure. We can't have this this circle of what organic farmers like to do is like get the organic matter back into the soil, right? We can't do this anymore. We just thought Dow would say, oh gosh, this is horrible, because their label said 90 days and then it would be gone. And we were going to tell them, no, 10 years, it's still here. This is your problem. And they basically turned it back on us. And they said, it's up to you to do a bioassay, because some plants are susceptible and some aren't. And if you're growing tomatoes, you need to test your compost ahead of time and make sure it doesn't have herbicides in it. And I just thought that was the most outrageous thing, that a chemical company could produce a chemical that persists that long in the environment and say, not our problem. It's up to you all to make sure that, you're not using manure that is contaminated with this herbicide. And of course it all is. So now that is just, it's a pollutant, right? We can't be composting our local organic matter anymore. I just think that's so wrong. And I was like, this is going to be, on Oprah and the front page of the New York Times. And it's like, no, this is just how the world works. Big companies come in and they contaminate your world, and you just have to deal with the consequences of that. So yeah, long story short, it started igniting some activism. I already kind of grew up in a Quaker environment and had a very activist mother. But once that personal contamination happened on my farm, it lit a fire that hasn't gone away.
Yeah, that is outrageous. Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. It's a problem they created, by spraying. They basically created herbicide resistant weeds and then had to create worse chemicals to kill the herbicide resistant weeds. And when it kills your plants, it's your fault, not theirs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's outrageous.
Even though their label is incorrect. I'm sorry, 90 days. No way. Especially in our dry environment, it just persists forever. It really doesn't break down.
Yeah. Well, and I know there have been other herbicides that maybe not as long lived as that, but yes, that people have had the same problems with in compost and mulch hay and stuff like that. So.
And people have, including myself when I started, they have so much faith in these companies to be accurate and only give us safe things. So I'll tell this story and they don't believe me. And you can actually go to the Dow website. And if you look up these aminopyralids, they have these little diagrams. There's literally these cows and it shows manure coming out their butt. And there's these big X's, like big red X's with an arrow, like a circle around the manure with an X. And then it shows a garden plant, right? And it's like, they are telling us you should not be using, composted manure to go onto your gardens. So they're admitting it. It's just, I still think that the information isn't accurate in terms of how long and persistent they can be. And I still think it's wrong that you can produce a chemical that does this.
Yeah. Well, and especially, I don't know if that saying it's 90 days helped them get approval for it. Probably did. But yeah, that shouldn't be. I mean, I think that's pretty classic, though, is that if you look at the marketing on herbicides, it's marketed to farmers of like, they've got these like Viper, like super aggressive names. It's like, it's going to stick to the crop, and then like when they're talking to the consumers, they're like, oh, it all washes off.
You can drink it. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
They've tricked the system. So as much as I think we need an EPA to regulate these things, the EPA also has very flawed ratings. So we need to fix the system. Milestone is one of these aminopyralids, and they rated it the highest for safety because they said you only need a small amount in order for it to work. And to me, that means, oh my gosh, parts per billion, right? This will work. So that's why we're getting symptoms in the smallest amounts of it in our compost, and we're still getting symptoms. But they rate that really high, like you don't need to use a lot of it. But the second thing they give it a really good rating for is the fact that it only needs to be sprayed once. And then it's good for the season, right? And to me, it's just like, wow, that is a very persistent product, that it's effective over the long term. That shouldn't be a high rating, right? So either way you put it, these chemicals aren't good, because if you have the opposite and it's water soluble and it goes everywhere and you need to spray it a lot, that's also not good. So like either way you have it, it's either persistent or it's going to get in your aquatic, waterways and everything. So there's no good chemical. There's no good rating system. We really just need to figure out giving people accurate information about what these chemicals are. And I think the whole organic system should be flip-flopped. Obviously, you need to be certified if you're using these chemicals, not if you're not using them. But this is the world we live in, where organic farmers are paying to prove that they're not using things.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately. But yeah, I guess that's the way it is. And
yeah, it's what we have to work with.
yes, hopefully we're making improvements here. Speaking of fixing the system, how did you come to work with the Real Organic Project?
Yeah, so in 2018, the hydroponic debate came up in front of the National Organic Standards Board about whether or not hydroponics should be certified. And it was the coolest thing to see all of these farmers start coming to the National Organic Standards Board meetings. And I was there working for a nonprofit called the Cornucopia Institute that did some research on the allowed inputs in organic farming. And, there are always these companies trying to get more inputs to be allowed in organic. We were one of these nonprofits that looked at whether or not they should be approved or not. And it was so fun to see all these farmers start coming to the meetings and talking about soil health. So that's where I met this kind of rambunctious group of farmers that were just like, obviously it's in the law. Soil is written like over 40 times, we counted at the time, into the law and the regulations. And it is required that you foster fertility in the soil as an organic producer. So we were just like, the law is protecting us here. And when the USDA just kind of rewrote history and said hydroponics has always been allowed, even though there was never a vote at the National Organic Standards Board to allow it, that's the point when we realized there were some top-down decisions being made about what organic was. It wasn't a kind of grassroots, ground-up movement anymore. And so the Real Organic Project was formed basically on the back of that failure and saying, we recognize that we still need certification in order to have, farmers have markets and eaters be able to find food that doesn't have pesticide residues, has good flavor, has good nutrition, all those things that they want organic to have, but that there were a lot of things being missed now with the law. And I know you talked to Dave about hydroponics, but once they got there, they started to realize that there were all of these livestock issues that weren't being covered. Of course, the people like me that were there all along had been working on the livestock issues, but I don't think the farmers realized how bad it was. So they have these things called poultry porches that they allow as outdoor access for laying hens for any poultry. And it's basically, you can take a 200,000 bird barn and stick a little concrete porch on it, open the door, even though the birds don't come outside because there's no pasture or anything for them to eat. That is considered outdoor access, and the law requires outdoor access. So it's actually a really fascinating story of some of the certifiers. Bay State Organic is a certifier that refused to certify the country hen because they didn't have outdoor access. They actually didn't even have one of those porches at the time. And the USDA said, no, Bay State, you have to certify them. And even though the Bay State refused the USDA, the country hen still sold their eggs as organic just because they had the support of the USDA. So and that was back in 2002. So right after the regulations were being enforced. And so really from the beginning, we've had this difference of, is organic only producing a product without prohibited substances, or is organic so much more? And organic livestock had always been about putting animals on pasture and knowing that there are health benefits from the animals when they eat pasture over total mixed rations. They have higher oleic acids and omega-3s, all these wonderful things in the meat and eggs. So it creates a more nutritious product, but it also makes it so that your pastures are healthy, right? These are all just part of the organic movement, and that hasn't transferred into the law. So the Real Organic Project formed when 15 farmers came together to create add-on standards to USDA organic. And they basically mimicked what the National Organic Standards Board was supposed to be doing. They just felt they were starting to make bad decisions. And so we thought, well, if the USDA isn't going to do it, this is our movement. This is our word, right? As a community, we brought this to the government and said, hey, there's all these people saying that they're organic and they're not, we need help here. And so we recognize that we still need some way of, in the marketplace, communicating how we grow, but the USDA was failing us in terms of enforcement. So that launched in 2018, and I got to be the first person to visit the pilot farms, which were 60 farms that were kind of strategically located all over the country that agreed that they all agreed that we needed to do more, and that we needed something like the Real Organic Project to communicate to eaters that, first of all, we do need certification, but second of all, that we need to have more standards than the USDA did.
Yeah, basically hewing to the original organic standards before the government started watering them down. So I'm like, oh, that's why it's the Real Organic Project, because it's sticking to the real organic standards, not the hydroponics, confined animal feeding operations, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Andrew, it took 2 years for us to come up with a name at the beginning, because we knew Real Organic would be controversial. It was making a statement, it was implying that there was organic out there that wasn't really organic in the opinion of the farmers. And there are multiple ways it came about. Dave's got a great story about it, but what I remember about how we doubled down on it really is Anna East Bedard was on our executive board at the time. And we just kept tossing around. We're like, are we deep organic? And she just she owns Lady Moon Farm. Her father, Tom Bedard, was part of, it was like started on 2 acres, and they're now like farming year round to be able to supply Whole Foods and, kind of the year round grocery stores. So they farm in Pennsylvania, and then they cover crop in Pennsylvania all through the winter, and they're farming in Florida. And then they flip-flop. So they have a long cover crop in Florida when they're farming in the summers in Pennsylvania. So they really steward incredible soil health with their cover cropping practices, because they're able to do it over such a long time. But at some point she said, I'm not any other kind of organic. I'm just organic, like we shouldn't have to come up with another name. Organic describes it. So that kind of solidified Real Organic Project as our name when she did that.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. It's good. I can imagine it would be hard to come up with, but yeah, at the end you're like, we are the Real Organics. So I think it's good.
I know this term regenerative has been really confusing for a lot of us, because I think a lot of the organic farmers started, we wanted to describe our farm as beyond organic, right? And so regenerative was a really enticing word to use, exactly what I'm talking about. Organic is soil health, it's biodiversity, it's all these other things. But we just realized that because regenerative didn't have a legal definition, that it would be co-opted so quickly, because that's what was starting to happen to organic. We had been through that already as a community. And so it didn't feel like a word that we should hop on the bandwagon for. A lot of organic farmers said, well, I'm not regenerating land that's degraded. My organic farm systems are healthy, and they've been healthy for decades. So the word didn't necessarily relate to a lot of people. But I think we have this kind of awesome groundswell around the word regenerative, and they need to do something really similar to what the organic movement did, which is call out the greenwashing when it's happening, right? Bayer is saying they're regenerative. This no-till with herbicides is calling itself climate smart and regenerative. And so we just need to be more transparent about the misuse of our words that we treasure so much to describe our way of farming. We need to call it out when we see it and be more brave. And I think that's so much of the spirit that the Real Organic Project holds on to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing where if you don't have standards, your label ends up meaning nothing, as in the way that, most people know if it's natural, if something says it's natural, it means, there's no standard, it basically means nothing. And I think, that's a good point, is people, because regenerative doesn't have standards. Yeah, there are people who are using herbicides that are calling what they're doing regenerative, and big ag companies are would love that.
Oh, they invented it, man. Yeah. They're like, we can use this word to describe our no-till herbicide practices. And they've been getting all this climate smart money from the USDA for it too. It's pretty upsetting.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate. And I think this conversation, at least in my mind, has value even to farmers who are not certified organic, because I think when the public buys a tomato that's certified organic, they're not thinking that it came from hydroponics. If they're buying like cage-free organic eggs, they're not thinking that those animals spent their whole life in a building, right? And so I think it's when people find out that that stuff is going on, it erodes their faith in the standards, right? So I think it's really important to do what you guys are doing and hold, say like, this is what the standard really should be, and we got to hold people to it. Because if it gets degraded, then it's like people won't. If people don't believe in the certifications, they're not going to seek them out, and in some cases pay a premium for them. So actually, Regarding the livestock in organic systems, I know the Real Organic Project is trying to make sure that animals have access to pasture and are able to express natural behaviors and things like that, since so many animals raised in factory farms don't have access to the outdoors or even enough space to live a normal life. Like when it comes to egg laying hens in battery cages and sows in farrowing pens and things like that. So, is the issue that confinement practices are explicitly being permitted in organic livestock farming, or that corners are being cut so that confinement happens in practice, or both?
Yes, that's a good question. So I should be clear that there are no organic chickens in cages. They have to, they're just like in a building, right? But they have to, that is what cage free is. Free range can just mean that you're not in a cage. So that is not allowed in organic to be caged. And there needed to be clarification with pigs as well. And so it was called the OLPP, and that was passed during the Obama administration. Organic livestock and poultry practices is what it stood for. But the Trump administration completely suspended it and overturned it and said, we're not going to do that. And then, so when the Biden administration came back in, they put it back in, but they had to update it. And so it's called the OLPS, and it's the first year that it's going into effect. It's supposed to be this year. But of course, there's like a 4-year grandfathering in for all of these, huge chicken barns that they're not in cages, but they're just in the barn, with these concrete porches attached to them. That's supposed to now be illegal starting 2025 with the OLPS rule. It's the new livestock standards rule. And it also specifically says you cannot have gestation crates for pigs, and is much more specific on what outdoor access means. So you have to have, a certain amount of living space for their quarters. And it means that these big buildings are going to have to reduce their stocking density. But man, you've got this operation called Herbrooks in Michigan, which to me is like the epitome of what's going wrong here, where you have 2-story chicken buildings. So clearly they're not actually accessing the dirt. Right. And the new law makes it so that there has to be dirt available to them. It can't be a concrete porch, but it also says there can be 25 or 30 feet, something like that, of concrete right outside the door. And again, there's no incentive. Actually, a bird is really afraid of going out into big, open, bright spaces where there's no tree cover because of their overhead predators. So what is going to get the chickens out of that building across the concrete over to this dirt pad, which is what the new law allows? I think Herbrooks is going to continue to operate just as they've operated. They'll have a little bit lower stocking densities, but unfortunately, I think we're always going to need a Real Organic Project to say, no, we actually meant on pasture, right? Not just some dirt, which when you don't have a movable building becomes really quickly contaminated. So our standards require that you maintain, 50% vegetative cover, and we check that. And the really sad thing is that once organic eggs became available, the price point was so low that everybody was just buying these CAFO organic eggs. It was 90% of the market was coming from, the organic market was coming from these confinement buildings. And it really made it so that the price point for what people who were truly rotating their little mobile houses, they're rotating them around on pasture. It made it so that the price point was just so exorbitant. And so then what they started to do in order to just make a living was, well, I guess I'll just call them non-GMO eggs instead of organic, but that they're pastured, right? Pastured non-GMO. And then we weren't buying organic grain anymore. And it was only because this issue of GMO as being the evil, not the herbicides that are affiliated with the GMO as being the problem, right? So they were feeding grain. All these organic pastured producers were starting to feed this non-GMO pastured poultry, which for sure I would buy over a confinement organic egg. So the difference there is that organic egg is actually getting organic grain, and that pastured poultry is not. But they're feeding them grain that's, been sprayed with herbicides. And to me, it's just the herbicide use in the environment that I was really upset about. And the kind of the greenwashing that goes with not truly understanding what a non-GMO pastured egg entails. But the cherry on top of all of this is that we really started to see a lot of fraudulent organic grain being imported. And The reason why we needed that was to feed all of these confinement livestock. So even the organic confined livestock operations were not actually getting the organic feed, which is what they were saying is the only thing that really distinguishes them from conventional production. The fraudulent organic feed was, going to fuel the confinement organic. And to be honest, there has been a lot of work, a lot of bipartisan support in stopping it, but they just switch what they're doing. It's actually, mafia related, and there's so much money involved in shipping grain and turning it organic in the process that it just keeps happening. And, one of the wonderful things about the Real Organic Project, we just get farmer stories. It's really from them that we are learning what's happening. And a lot of grain farmers are just telling us how much fraud is still going on with imported grain. There's a great podcast episode that I did with Scott Myers talking about it on the Real Organic podcast.
Okay, right. That's worth pointing out if people are enjoying hearing about this kind of stuff. You guys have a great podcast that they should check out, and they can check out that episode. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like you said, it's mafia related, like like organized crime mafia, or like.
Yeah, Ann Ross at the Cornucopia Institute has been working with John Bowlby. She's, received threats when she was doing some of this investigation. It's really quite sophisticated what's going on. And it's funny because it's really easy to stop if we wanted to. But because there's so much economic interest in growing organic to meet demand and keeping it affordable, these are all the lines that, the USDA uses is, well, don't you want everybody to have organic? I was like, no, not if it's not really organic, So Europe just put an end to it. They do testing all throughout the supply chain. They figure it out really quick, right? And in the US, there's no incentive to do it because everybody's making money. So I would look into Ann Ross's work at Cornucopia. And really, I think there's a lot of effort to try to stop the import fraud, but there hasn't been a lot of in the field action. One of the most common things that happens is, and it's not just with grain, it's if you get to our port, APHIS is the pest authority. And if there's a pest that we don't want in our country, we'll fumigate the imports, and then we won't change the boxes from saying organic. And it's we need to do that work. We need to make it so that that product is no longer organic. I understand that you have to spray to keep a pest out. Honestly, that stuff is here already. So I used to work in plant pathology. It's sometimes things are sprayed, sometimes they're not the next time. So to think that we're, going to spray a whole shipload and keep stuff out, it's a little silly. But if we do spray it, it's legally required for it to change its organic labeling. And that is not happening. So if we would just test the products more, we would catch it. But really nobody's doing that work. And the government should be. The certifiers should be. It's just not getting done. Right? Somebody loses a lot of money when we do it. So you would think that, it's all really hard to talk about because we're organic farmers and we need organic to work for us. So for a long time, the strategy was, well, don't talk about it out loud. Let's work behind the scenes and see if we can fix it. And I just think we got to the point where we are realizing it's not working to do that, to stay quiet. So we need to make some noise, get to be there to be some outrage so that our farms stop going out of business trying to compete with this fake stuff. We need it to work so that our farms can be economically viable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like it's because the biggest players are in the industry are the ones who are pushing for the shortcuts and making the money. And so, of course, they're big industrial ag operations are going to have the money to hire lobbyists in the way that small farmers.
Yeah.
I imagine most of our audience don't.
Well, and I still have to compete with that $3.50 organic cherry tomato pint on the store, which means they bought that pint for half of that, right? And I'm selling mine for $4.75 wholesale a pint. So yeah, there's no way I can compete with that.
Yeah, well, besides the fact that the consumer should get what they think they're getting when they buy organic, it's very demoralizing as a producer. We don't have them anymore, but we used to have, well, what seemed like to me, it's a lot of hens. At one point, we had 300 laying hens, in a chicken tractor, on pasture moving around that were certified organic. And I seem to remember this was a number of years ago, we struggled with it, and we ultimately gave up the chickens.
It doesn't work economically, does it?
Yeah, because I seem to remember we were paying about twice as much for the organic grain. And, one thing we weren't really undercut by big ag. I mean, we were in a way, they were, but also what happens is our area is so rural that so many people have backyard chickens around here that we were, we tried everything as far as buying grain and buying organic grain in bulk and raising the price. And, we tried everything to make our chickens profitable. And I think in addition to having cheaper organic eggs, probably from some big barn in the store, also we had a lot of people around here who just would sell, roadside eggs, have like sign out like $2.50 a dozen. And I think people have a lot of respect for local too. And so I guess, and so it was really hard for us to be selling organic eggs for, I forget what we were, $5 or $6 a dozen, like whatever we penciled out that we needed to get to make a profit, when there's cheaper organic eggs in the store and also cheaper, local eggs by people who I think have backyard flocks and are just selling their extras. So finally we just threw in the towel.
But Andrew, I'll tell you, the demand is there for a real organic pastured egg. It's just, there is so much greenwashing that people truly want to support organic. I believe it. They want to eat it. They don't want the chickens to be, whatever that local egg is in order for it to be $2.50. They don't want to support that chemical grain production. I believe that there are enough customers to have made your operation viable economically if they knew the real story, right? Because I do believe there's enough people that would support it. And then when there's enough demand around it, right, and you're not competing with such heavily subsidized and greenwashed chemical production, I just think it makes, you can get an economy of scale. And I know Cameron Mulberg has been able to show that with chicken meat production, that he's been able to kind of scale up on 30 acres. I don't know how many birds he has run through that, but it's pretty impressive. So I think that there's just so much greenwashing that people don't really know what's behind that local egg, right? Or because they truly do not want to support the chemicals in their food system anymore. So I just wish that it could be fully transparent, and then I think it would work.
Right. Well, that's the problem, is I think people, when they buy organic, they think they're getting one thing, and that's what you're pointing out, is that, well, that egg, that chicken that laid your organic egg may have never, seen a blade of grass in its life. And I think people get that, a kid could understand that's wrong. But so it's my understanding that you were, basically like, the reason that we got to the point of Real Organic Project is that you were pushing the USDA on all these standards that are really not high enough, and that they just weren't willing to change them. And so that's when it was like, we need a whole nother, we need the Real Organic Project to certify that it's the way that organic should be.
Yeah, for sure it was about transparency and integrity and economic viability and eaters getting the food that they really wanted. So those are all really connected.
Mm-hmm. And the issues of these standards are still being argued over, right? But it's pretty clear, it seems like the USDA is probably going to not change its mind. That's like, as far as certifying hydroponics and having the really weak standards on like access to the outdoors for animals and stuff like that.
Yeah. We would love to just walk away and not have to do this work. All of us are farmers. Dave's like a full-time volunteer executive director of this project. So it would be incredible if we could all just go back to farming and the system would work for us so that we actually, had economic opportunity again. I think organic really did work for a long time. And with every industry, kind of the watering down happened at different rates. You saw for a long time organic dairy really thriving in New England, where you are, up until about 2015. And at which point the CAFO milk just, it became greater than 50% of the marketplace. And really they started to multiply their huge facilities out in the Midwest, so that there was a lot of consolidation, and a lot of the Texas organic dairies that were greater than 10,000 cows And you can't get that many cows out to pasture and back to the milking facility. So it's just like, how are you doing that, right? You're going to eat the pasture close to the milking facility, and then at some point they're going to have to walk too far away. There won't be pasture there for them to eat. So clearly the standards aren't being met when the herd gets that big. Then you have the influx of so much fraudulent milk, a lack of enforcement of those grazing standards those are actually part of the regulations. We just have bad enforcement. So some of it, it's like the law is there. We're just not getting enforcement, like the grain fraud too. And some of it is just the USDA has made the wrong call on issues like hydroponic, but it's affecting every sector of our industry right now. And the crazy thing is that where they've had really good enforcement in Europe, their organic is growing so much faster than it is here. And I think that's testament to show that like people actually want strong standards. When you go purchase organic, you want it to have a lot of meaning. And so it's only, I think it's 6% of all the food sold in the US, but it's only 1% of the land is certified as organic because it's really not working for the farmers. So much is being imported. And I think, the whole reason why we created the standard is for that higher price point and economic viability of our operations. And it's just not working for us right now. It's going to take a while for the Real Organic Project seal to have marketplace value, but I believe it will over time because it'll come to be known and trusted.
Yeah, I sure hope so, because I can see what you're saying about how the cheap, obviously the whole reason people want to cut corners is because it's cheaper. And so I can see how flooding the market with cheaper production that doesn't really meet the standards of organic makes it, I think it's confusing to consumers, and it puts the farmers who are doing it the hard way, the real way, makes them less viable. So,
yeah, there's this saying that kind of goes around in this work called allowing it mandates it. Like allowing a cheaper form of producing it essentially makes it that it's the only thing available in the marketplace because of the cheaper forces, economic forces under the same label. There's no way to differentiate the better practices. And, they'll say, well, let's just give a big tent for organic and allow a lot of people in. And what that really creates is that it puts the people doing it better out of business when you create this idea of a big organic tent. They know how to twist the language to make you feel really bad about what you're trying to do when you're doing the right thing. But, you got to just, it's really the company like that I'm in, that the other farmers, they have such integrity and they live their lives with, truly living out their principles that they've always had. These organic principles are so much a part of who they are. It just, you're doing the right thing when you're sharing this company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of farmers who do it the right way because it's their family farm and they believe in it, but that's making it a race to the bottom. That's really good point. Where if something's allowed that that makes production cheaper, it's going to make it hard for people to resist to do whatever's cheapest for production. And when you said that they were testing the grain in Europe, you mean like testing it for presence of herbicide to verify, right? Because if it were organic grain, or even if it were organic grain and there was, let's say, herbicide drift or something like that, you still doesn't have the health benefits that people are looking for. Like you would still want to know, even if it were organic grain that had drift or something like that, you would still want to know about that. So is that what you meant when you said they were testing the grain in Europe?
They test all throughout the supply chain. So I don't know if you know, Bob Quinn started Kamut. He's got this really great book called Grain by Grain that he wrote with Liz Carlisle about his story of getting these ancient grains. And he was selling it to Europe, and their threshold for glyphosate is so low. He ended up not being able to sell his grain because of drift. And actually, I don't even think it was drift. It was in the rain because he couldn't even figure out where the drift was coming from. So they have much more rigorous. I mean, we keep raising that level of glyphosate that's allowed because so much is being used with no-till now that we've had to keep increasing the limits that we're allowed in our food. But in Europe, they have stricter standards. They test it at the ports. They test it all the way throughout the supply chain. So one of the big success stories, the Real Organic Project was able to get some almonds from the Burroughs family farm into the European market through our certification. And they just couldn't believe that like the store was testing it. All of the buyers throughout the supply chain test because none of them want to get caught selling anything fraudulent that's labeled organic. It all falls back on them. And for some reason, we don't have that accountability on the businesses when, we have all these nonprofits that go and they test and they find residues on organic, and everybody just kind of wash their hands of responsibility here. And I don't understand what that is. Like, why in Europe they just have greater accountability to each other than we do here. I'm not sure what that is, but we need more of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I agree. It is perplexing. Yeah, unfortunately, if we're the guinea pigs, and with a lot of this stuff. I mean, there's a little. Used to have a job that, one of the things that sort of like made me more interested in organic farming is, well, for one thing, I always thought like, oh, well, the government's making sure that whatever, gets sprayed on our food is safe. And I realized that's not true. And I had a job where I was looking at just the huge number of chemicals, not even just pesticides, just the enormous number of chemicals that come on the market every year. And there's not really any safety testing. It's almost like, people can basically start, a lot of times start using a chemical without making sure it's safe. Let alone something like glyphosate that's in our environment. Like, actually, I thought about glyphosate when you were talking about the new classes of pesticides that they said were like very safe because you only had to use a little because they were so strong. Like, I know glyphosate has been passed off by the industry as like a fairly safe herbicide. And so now we have it. Yeah, it's like in the water. Like, it's so much of it is being used now because of no-till, conventional no-till operations that it's just in the environment, which is,
it's literally in the rain. Yeah.
Which is what we're trying to prevent with organic agriculture, right? I can't think of a better example of that, of like, this is where you get, if there's no standards for these things and they're just being sprayed everywhere, it's what then you have pesticide in the rain. You just can't really get away from it.
There's that bumper sticker, organic farmers make good neighbors. And it's literally because, you have to like close down your windows when your neighbor is spraying their lawn. You smell it, we are just being doused in chemicals all the time. I mean, this PFAS story of all these dairies getting contaminated with these forever chemicals that comes from sludge that was applied in the 70s, and it's still here, and they're having to move locations because they can't clear it from their land sometimes. So it's just tragic, and it's only getting worse.
Yeah, it's a huge problem here in Maine, you probably know. Yeah, lots of PFAS contamination. In fact, we did an episode with Caleb Goosen, who's the organic crop specialist at MOFGA, talking about PFAS. And I think it's a problem everywhere. And I think we kind of realized it early here in Maine. And so, I drew on him, not just because he was here in Maine, but I think people realized that the sludge, which has never been permitted in organic production. But like, I know people who organic farmers who bought farms doing their, organic chemical free farming, right? And only to come later find out it's really sad that their soils and thus their crops and now their bodies have a lot of PFAS. I mean, all of us have PFAS in our bodies, unfortunately, but they probably at a higher level because of sludge spreading that happened. Yeah, like you said, decades before they even bought the farm, but because they're forever chemicals, they're still there. And it's been devastating for them to have to not be able to use the farm that they've built. So yes, hopefully we'll have higher standards in the future so that we're not all just like guinea pigs for chemical combinations. Because I mean, I don't know, we're preaching to the choir here, but my other impression is that, okay, so they might even do toxicology studies on like one chemical, but what happens when you tank mix that chemical with a couple other chemicals in a sticker spreader and then other chemicals from other crops? Like, we really have no idea what the impact of these cocktails of chemicals is having on our bodies, which is why hewing to the organic standards is important, but it's very discouraging.
It's not just in our food. I mean, learning about the PFAS thing, I learned that it's in flame retardants in our couches and in our carpets. And, I do my core exercises so my back doesn't go out now that I'm older, and I'm like, my face is against the carpet. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm breathing in PFAS right now, right? Just this awareness of how much we are contaminating our environment. It needs to grow. It's not okay. Right. It's only as we get more people on the planet, it's only getting worse. And I think maybe that's why the difference in Europe is like they have a more heavily populated, older population, and they've just had to deal with living right on top of each other for much longer than we have. And we have this sense that like, oh, land is just endless and open space and it's not going to last. And we've already seen the effects of what the chemicals are doing to us. So we've really got to start mimicking what they're doing over there. And guess what? We need regulations to do that. We need more government and we need effective government.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're probably preaching to the choir with this audience, but yeah, whatever they're doing, I don't understand why they take it so much more seriously than we do in this country. Or if it's I don't know if it's money, if it's lobbying, if it's like why we let our systems get bought off by money. Because I feel like, I mean, I think about my kids. I know I've got PFAS and probably glyphosate in my body, even though we've never used it on our farm. And I wonder what all the accumulation of all these chemicals and then things like microplastics, I'm concerned that at some point, it's all going to build up and start. I mean, I think it already is leading to more health problems, but lead to shorter lives and less healthy lives for all of us, because it's not anymore of like, oh, I can just buy organic food and not be exposed to it when it's in the rain. Or like, I think of like rain jackets. I didn't know for like a lot of the rain, like when I heard like durable water repellent like on my rain gear for years, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been like getting wet and sweaty in a garment that's covered in PFAS. Yeah. Like how it makes me wonder how much of that I've absorbed through my skin over the years.
And so much of it is in that small parts per billion. They're endocrine disruptors, right? These are hormone levels. So it's like the small amounts in our body are having an effect similar to what hormones do.
It's discouraging, but it's also why what you guys are doing is so important.
Like our small farms will thrive like they do in Europe because they've gotten on top of some of this stuff. I don't want to paint it as like a perfect place over there, but they have had add-on standards to their EU organic standards for 40 years. And because of that, they're small farms, they're localized regional distribution. All of that is thriving over there. Organic is 10, 15% in each country instead of 6%, but they have that much land too, right? And they have goals of bringing it beyond 30%. So yeah, we just got a lot of catch up to do.
Yeah, we do. We're working on it. Are there any other issues that you work on there at the ROP that we haven't talked about that you might want to talk about? Or is there anything, I guess you don't know what Dave and I talked about, because this interview will run after Dave. So if people are listening to this episode and didn't listen to the previous episode where we talked with Dave Chapman specifically about focusing on the issue of hydroponics being certified as organic. So I know you don't know what we talked about that, but is there anything that I haven't asked you about that, including hydroponics, if there's anything you want to say about hydroponics, is there anything that you're working on there at the ROP that we should talk about?
Well, there's kind of a fun concept that, if we had weaker standards, the movement could grow a lot faster. We'd have a lot more farms. And we've been talking to one of these add-on labels in Europe is called Naturland, and they're farmer led just like we are. And we've been asking them for advice. They're a whole farm standard. And, we've had to refuse a lot of farms because of this whole farm standard. And hopefully they still feel part of the organic movement. It's much like the biodynamic standard where we're looking at the whole farm. But it just means that, it's going to be a smaller movement. And Naturland has this concept of dying in beauty, which is like, you have to be careful. You can't have your standards so strict that they're not achievable by anyone, in which case you're just, you're dying in beauty. You're not a movement. You're not saving any farms. But it's interesting. Every time we talk about, well, should we drop the whole farm standard? And if we talk to eaters, they're like, no, we're so tired of these, things rising up, having so much excitement around them. And then, oh God, they're co-opted and let's start over again. You know what I mean? And so I think that there is a lot of just, our standards board has addressed this whole farm issue every year for the last 8 years that we've come together, and they keep voting to keep it. And I think the pressure to grow fast, we can't cave into that. We have to hold on to what is beautiful, because there's so many things that get a lot of excitement and then just get co-opted, right? I don't want that to happen. We've had farmers say, well, when are we going to have a real organic project? Like kind of rolling their eyes. And I don't think, because we're such a democratically farmer-led group, I don't see that happening. Every time these issues come up, like, should we, do this in order to have more farms? The answer has been no. And that it makes me happy. I feel good about it. I can go to sleep at night and just feel like I'm living to these organic principles that have always been part of our movement. And we have worker welfare where we're actually like handing out, like, here's what your legal rights are, right? And we're not requiring a living wage or anything like that, but just make sure that like there are wages happening, right? And they're transparent. And so I feel really proud that like all of these issues have been part of the organic movement from the beginning. And so much was lost when the USDA came around, but the organic movement is still strong. There are a lot of small farms that are growing organically that don't need organic certification, and they are part of the organic movement, right? So I guess I feel really, really proud at the end of the day to be working on something that I believe in so much. And I acknowledge that, like you said at the beginning, like we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Just the farmers that launched this and got rules into place at the USDA. Organic has become so corporate that that's lost on the younger generation. And I want to share that story of how it happened, because I think there's lessons to be learned in it. If we start working with the government on getting regulations around regenerative or whatever, I want them to learn from what the organic movement has been through and just tell that story. It's getting lost. And there are so many people, so many farmers to look up to that have just led these lives of complete dedication to this concept of what organic is. And it's so much bigger than just no chemicals, right? It's soil health, it's community, it's just kind of living it day to day. What does that mean to live organic? And it has to do with your raincoat, right? It has to do with how you buy from local businesses and stuff. There are all these values that are incorporated in the founders of organic. And I want to make sure that story's told and that it's not lost. I think that's what we're at risk of losing here with organic getting so diluted by the USDA is something really precious, which is an organic movement that was very strong. And the Real Organic Project is an attempt to hold on to that.
Yeah. Well, good. And it's so important because it might be worth pointing out. I think I got involved in working on farms around the time that the NOP came about. I think you said year 2000.
2000, yeah.
Yeah. And so, before that, there were individual state and regional certifying agencies. And so I think that I feel like for a long time, big agriculture tried to just write off organic, say like, all the like, well, it'll never feed the world or whatever, until they realized that organic was the quickly growing segment, in the marketplace. And then I think it was sort of like, once they realized it wasn't going away, then they decided
Can I get a piece of it?
Yeah, they wanted to co-opt it, right? So they could have the label without jumping through all the hoops.
Changing their practices.
Yeah. So, maybe if people haven't been involved in the organic movement for that long, I think that's an important part of history that ties into what you were saying. And it's important to keep the standards high so it means what people think it means.
And it's funny because I still buy organic all the time because I certainly don't want to buy the chemical food. It's just you need to ask more questions, right? And knowing these stories might get you to the farmer's market and buying a little bit more where you feel like you've got a lot more transparency. So I hope that these stories don't make people just, none of it's worth it anyway. None of it's real. Well, it's certainly better than the alternative. And maybe it just gets you to get a little bit more active in ensuring that the integrity stays strong, or get a little active in nonprofits like the Real Organic Project, or even just supporting your local farmers more and asking more questions about what they're up to.
Yeah. Ask the farmers questions or look for that Real Organic Project label. Because I think, that's a real danger, is that people find out that organic, the USDA certified organic might not mean what they think it means, and just become disillusioned with like standards and certifications. It's like, well, if that doesn't mean anything either, then why am I even like going to the trouble?
Yeah. But then you have to go eat that food and you're like, well, this isn't what I want either. You know what I mean? So see what you can do to inform yourself and find the food that you really want.
Yeah, that's a good message. Well, actually, that might be a good message to end on. You've been really generous with your time, but I wanted to ask if there's anything else that I should have asked you or that you'd like to say before we let you go.
I could talk forever with you, Andrew, and other farmers. So I just say, take care of your bodies. I certainly was very hard on them in terms of what I lifted, and took advantage of myself not really realizing what it's like to get into your 40s and try to keep farming. So do those core exercises when you're young and keep a good back, and just don't overdo it. If you want to stay in it in the long run, it's going to hurt if you don't take care of yourself. So that's the only message I would pass on.
Yeah, that's a good message. Do the core exercises on a non-PFAS mat, ideally. But yeah, I think that's so classic my wife and I, we definitely overworked ourselves, and when we probably should have been hiring people and stuff like that. You got to remember, if you want to do it for a lifetime, it's not just the crops you got to take care of. People got to take care of themselves. So that might be a good message to end on.
And don't pulse when you do them. Hold a position for like a minute. I was hurting myself trying to do the exercises. So, you know what? I'm going to get, my brother works with the best, because he's in Cirque du Soleil and he works with the best physical fitness people. And he taught me a 10-minute core exercise where I'm truly getting stronger and I'm not injuring myself doing the exercises. I'm going to get him to post it because it changed my life once I started doing it. Don't hurt yourself doing the exercises either. That's a mistake I made. So yeah, just body care. Definitely pay attention to that and make sure you're doing your exercises right. Sorry, I had to do that because it took me a long time to figure out how to even do my core so that I wasn't further injuring it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty classic, as farmers take care of everything else except for themselves. And then they hit their 40s. Like, I'm late 40s here. And luckily I didn't get any lasting, nothing that I couldn't fix, but I think a lot of people hurt their backs or can't farm like they did when they're in their 20s anymore. But you will be more if you take care of yourself. All right, well, tell your brother to tag Growing for Market when he posts that, because I'm not sure if I follow your brother or not, and so maybe we'll share it out to our audience, farmers.
Yeah, he owes it to me to do that. It changed my life, and I know it will save so many farmers' careers if they do it. So I'll see if I can get him to do it for you.
Okay, cool. All right, Linley. Well, where can people find you and the Real Organic Project online or social media or wherever you want them to look you up?
Sure. realorganicproject.org, like organic. We've got a great podcast. We've got a great newsletter. Subscribe to all those things and get involved.
Yes, absolutely. I enjoy your podcast. So yeah, people should check that out if they enjoy this kind of thing. There's more there. So
thanks, Andrew.
All right. I agree. I feel like we could have gone on, but I think we covered the topic for today. So maybe we'll have you on some other time and talk more about soil or pathogens. Or I feel like there's a lot we could talk about, but I really appreciate the time today. Linley, I really enjoyed the conversation.
I had fun. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.